pleasure to be here, and we do have a very intimate group, so I think that can be a great way to make this more of an engaging environment, and I'd be happy to hear your questions, okay? Not normally do we have such a sort of teacher to student ratio, so we can go from there. I'm thrilled to be talking about how to create greater sense of, run back, how to create a greater sense of resilience and energy in our day-to-day. I believe it's something that's foundational to just being human, and even more important now in the age of AI. However, we're often not bringing this into the entrepreneurship space and to founders. And it's really particularly important for founders because of the natural intrinsic motivation that comes with entrepreneurs, the people who get into entrepreneurship, their personalities, and what is this inner drive. So I have a lot to explore. Just to start off, I wanted to anchor some with alternative metrics. So if we can see here, maybe you can't see so well, but I use Spain as an anchor since we're here in Spain. The World Happiness report came out. It comes out every year in March, around the International Day of Happiness, which is recognized by the United Nations. And Spain is ranked 41. Now, Finland, for 8 years in a row, has been ranked the top country in terms of world happiness. And you might say, wait, it's a little too hot here today, but it's really cold there normally, right? And that's the first thing that people say in Europe. It's cold, but what about the social? And the social engagement? And actually digging into the detail, the key driver for Finland is safety in what is the community, the infrastructure, the social net that supports people in general. And there's a definite sense that I'm not being my best at the expense of others, that we are collectively creating a space for living. And that's really a key insight in terms of what brings in general health. And for founders, how can we take those insights and think about them in terms of the businesses we're creating, but also the impact in the world. And now if we go to Gallup, we're seeing the Gallup daily stress in Spain is at 39%, just 1 point below the global average of 40%. The question there is, yesterday I felt a great deal of stress. So let me ask you, yesterday I felt a great deal of stress. Maybe we're at South Summit, maybe you didn't feel a great deal of stress, but on a normal, what's today, Thursday? On a normal Wednesday, I felt a great deal of stress. How many of you would say yes? Raise your hand. Okay, we're over 40% right there, all right? So it's really becoming the norm, I feel a great deal of stress. And then finally, we have this engagement number. In Spain, it's 10%. The world average is 20%. We see huge differences between what are established economies and growing economies. So any type of growing economy, you're going to find greater levels of engagement, whereas you have established economies, especially in Europe, we're seeing lower levels of engagement. So we're in Spain, we're in part of Europe, but we're seeing that the engagement levels are low. What does that mean? Engagement is, I feel I have the capacity to meet the challenges of the day-to-day. Just like in general, my inner capacity, but I have what it takes to meet those challenges. And when we don't, we feel a greater sense of dread, a greater weight. It's a decreased energy. It requires more to lift ourselves up. And so that continues in our day-to-day. Now, we see from Gallup that the high well-being companies have roughly 70% engagement. Global average is 20%. We're seeing that high well-being companies have 70% engagement. As founders, as entrepreneurs, what do you want from your people? You want engagement, right? You want people who come motivated, who come energized, who come rested, and are ready to contribute, and that are continuing to learn. So these are numbers that come from different metrics, but part of my focus today is to say, how can we elevate a more holistic approach to what is work, to what is entrepreneurship, and consider alternative metrics that are going to allow for that sustainable impact and that sustainable energy. So I encourage you to think about that theme as we go through. So let's talk about entrepreneurship. Now going worldwide, we're seeing that 90% of businesses globally are run by entrepreneurs. Now that's a whole range of businesses, but what we're talking about, it's individuals who have that passion from within, who have decided to create a company for the impact of that company, but also for the impact on the employees. We see that 70% of global employment is due to entrepreneur or small to medium-sized companies. And global GDP, 50% is made up of those companies. So this is a huge percentage of work happening on a global level. 55 to 60 trillion dollars economic output annually, right? So why do entrepreneurs get into the business of entrepreneurship? Anybody here starting their own business, or what do you think? What is it that motivated you?
Changes the way people wait right now because we have fintech. That's why we like to
Thank you.
disrupt. Yeah, we would like to disrupt payment flow online on all digital channels and make it more seamless, without any inconvenience for the customers, like you do checkout in offline places. Yeah, you just select your product, talk with your seller,
Yeah.
and then maybe got some, I don't know, advice. Yeah, and online usually you just fill in forms, no human touch, no personalization. In our case, we connect merchant and buyer through the messengers, through the WhatsApp, through the Instagram, and we open this ecosystem to do transactions between customers and users.
Wonderful. So what I'm hearing you say is the world has evolved, but you're seeing that some things aren't working well. There's high level of friction on one side in terms of the operational and low level of personalization and that sort of human touch. And you're saying, hey, we've got to fix this, right? So you're seeing what I'm understanding is that's very purpose driven to say there's an opportunity, right? And that I have the capacity to meet that, right? Anyone else want to share in terms of motivations? Yes, no? Okay, please share.
Thank you. So my motivations, I've got two different kind of businesses. One's as a writer, a fictional writer, and that it was about writing and getting into my flow and my passion. And also hopefully making a difference by the stories that I write. So that's the first one. And the second is Booksicle, the startup I'm here for, and that's within the pain point of a writer's experience that we're fixing. So my brother and I we're both writers, and so we've got to experience the fragmentation of it. So we're just looking to help people, and ultimately, I also love freedom. And I know that being an entrepreneur, actually, we work a lot more, but we work a lot more under our own authority and agency than maybe a typical 9-to-5 boss that locks me into a location. Sorry.
Wonderful.
So dramatic.
Thank you. So I'm hearing a lot of agency in the capacity, a lot of personal connection with what you're doing, the flexibility, the autonomy. Someone said the other day, entrepreneurs are always on vacation and never on vacation, or holiday if you're talking in Europe, right? And also just that what we find is there's this really common wanting to focus on the ability to help other people. There's this intrinsic I want to help other people. And normally we're all looking to make money as well, but doing something we're really passionate about, right? So there's this wonderful motivations, intrinsic motivation to be an entrepreneur. And it sets us up to just start running and saying, but also there's a sense of urgency typically, right? That I've got to get this done quickly because technology is changing and I want to be the one in the market, right? And so there's a sense of urgency, how to make this happen. But balancing that, always on kind of culture is really the challenge. So my question is, when was the last time that you woke up and felt really energized? Yes? Great. Every morning, great. Usually it's the people who are creating balance and finding that passion each and every day, but with balance. So typically, at the beginning, we have a greater sense of energy. We have that motivation. We're like, I'm going to make it happen. Yet over time, there's an accumulative effect of exhaustion. And actually, that's what we see in terms of burnout, that it's multifactorial and accumulative. It doesn't just all of a sudden happen, right? It starts with the mental exhaustion that leads to the emotional, which leads to the cognitive, right? And how those start compiling. And then they have an impact on our behaviors, our sleep, et cetera, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So my idea is, how do we reframe and really reposition so that we can wake up feeling energized. And it has to do with recognizing the interconnection of what it means to be an entrepreneur, yet keeping that perspective and that balance over time. All right, so this is where we're going to be focusing. I'm going to go on a little bit of a dark path first before we see the light at the end of the tunnel, okay? So let's talk about success. What does venture success look like? This is pretty good, right? It's the opportunity, the team, the capital, how to scale it, how to make it sustainable, right? Success is about grow, build, metrics of growth, right? And some sort of economic metrics as well. Okay, we all have that quite clear, and that comes in every sort of pitch, etc. Do we ever talk about entrepreneur success? Have we ever thought about that? What would entrepreneur success look like? Balance, joy, energy. Do we have that in our pitches? No, right? Is that something people are caring about? Is that in the job description of an entrepreneur? What is on the job description? Passion, drive, right? Capacity, yet not sustained capacity or sustained joy, right? Pardon? Impact, right? That's part of, so I don't have it here, but that's part of venture. But is that, it's part of the purpose of the entrepreneur, but are we measuring success according to the impact of people rather than just financials? So what I would say is what got us into entrepreneurship is very clear. There's a clear attachment, but yet at the same time, we're not connecting with that in terms of measuring what is success. And because we're not making that link, we're risking our businesses based on our own success. And that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so bringing in some other voices and opinions. So this is two mixed together. First are the World Economic Forum skills needed today and tomorrow, and talking about what are those skills. And so we see that there's the desired skills of the future, and what you see highlighted in blue is McKinsey Health Institute saying how many of those skills are brain skills. We could argue they're all brain skills, but they're saying that these specifically, technological literacy, creative thinking, resilience, flexibility and agility, curiosity, lifelong learning, leadership and social influence, interesting, they're calling it a brain skill, right? And analytical thinking. What are we doing when we think about our business and those growth metrics, that impact, that success? Are we transferring that into entrepreneurship and ourselves and protecting our brain capital as an entrepreneur, but also as our teams? Are we building these areas of success into our businesses? The next I just want to show as a point of reference. I hope you can see this okay. But it's kind of to make the point, finding value in an AI-driven industry. Now, I appreciate that I come from IE University, and they were here at South Summit, and probably the dominant word, if you want to call it a word, is AI, right? That's just everywhere. Yet, at the same time, how are we balancing AI with what is being human? And so I wanted to show you that there's on the right-hand side, you can see investment focus versus improvement achieved. And I'm just going to go straight to the point here and say that investment, focus in investing is the yellow, but achieved improvement should be on the other side of the yellow. We should have an improvement, right? And the only areas where we see that is employee well-being and improved sustainability. Everything else in terms of agility, profitability, increased resilience even, speed, technology scalability, increased market share, efficiency, productivity, operating costs, we're not seeing the return on investment. Right, this is just one perspective, but it gives us something to think about and, hey, what are we thinking in terms of well-being? What does that look like? And can well-being be a driver of performance? Well, that leads us to the next question. Improving employee well-being is an $11.7 trillion opportunity. Yet are we reframing? We've just established we have venture success, but we don't have entrepreneur success. And entrepreneurs are embodying what is an embodiment culture, creating in their firms, creating what people will mimic and how they're expected to act, right? And if we increase energy, we talk about recovery, we talk about a different type of performance, sustained health, and impact, as you're saying, but not just in terms of financial impact. Really, what is the impact connecting with purpose? What is the impact in terms of how we're treating other people? How we are creating a culture that's really embodying the benefits of the services we're trying to create as well. Not just the service, but really connecting at a human level. All right, so what are we faced with? Well, number one, there's a paradox. We'll have three paradoxes. One, we have an output-driven model. And AI is only increasing this, right? We have this always-on culture, this need for we can do more, and that's the urgency that you face, but it's also what is our output? What are we producing? We are highly biased in terms of production, right? What are we producing? And at the same time as we have, I'll jump back, $11.7 trillion opportunity to invest in employee well-being as an impact on a global scale. I did that, sorry. We have a $10 trillion lost productivity from disengagement. I showed you the numbers earlier, 10% engagement. What is disengagement? 90%, right? That's for Spain. Europe is, I believe, about 12%, right? So how do we invest in people? And I've heard a lot of people say, hey, you have a job, you should show up ready to work. We just don't work that way. And it's multifactorial that we don't even realize what is having an impact, right? So how can we consider what is our business, but entrepreneur success, and recognize that there is this tendency, this bias for production, for urgency, for being always on. And success is coming at a cost. And what is that cost, right? So if we're only looking at that growth, the financial, without considering the cost. All right, so anybody considering your venture and the metrics to determine success? Anybody want to share? User numbers, maybe, right? Supplier numbers. What else? Churn rate, revenue, profit, funds raised. All right, I keep doing that. I apologize. There we go. Let's consider, keep that in mind and consider as we go forward. All right, so the second paradox we see is this human capacity crisis. We have an output model, this urgency always on, and at the same time we're expecting our people to do more and more and more, yet the current system and everything that's happening with our use of technology, AI, you see it here, how do we develop a greater human capacity for performance, right? And what we're seeing in terms of particularly squeezed are the leaders. Now, depending on the stage of your startup, that might just be you, right? But if it's as you grow, you start to build in leaders, and those leaders are very close to you. Oftentimes we have that sort of bias of bringing in people like ourselves, not considering diversity in our teams. And those leaders are going to be taking cues from you, and the entire culture will be driven by how you are acting, right? So we recognize that leadership's influence is fundamental. They talk about 70%, sort of it can sway 70% of what is, how the leader is and the impact that they have on their team. Yet at the same time, we're seeing increased levels of stress, right? Decrease in engagement and lower well-being outcomes specifically for the leaders. So if we look at that, going to the State of the Global Workplace by Gallup, we're seeing that even if we look at the overall numbers, engagement isn't declining that much, but when we dig into the detail, we are seeing that it's leaders' engagement, which is declining quite a bit. What is the challenge that leaders face in terms of their own energy and their own engagement? What do you think?
Burnout, or lack of ability to create the narrative or drive the narrative as in the startup scales. Oh, yeah. I don't know if did you hear that?
Yeah, repeat it. Go ahead.
Okay. So I would say general burnout and inability then to scale their energy as their startup scales. So people topics then become out of reach, right? Because they can no longer manage that. So it leads maybe to withdrawal.
Great. You bring up really good points here, okay? And we'll see it here. What else? Anybody else want to share? We have some key challenges of leaders. Go ahead, yes, please.
Meeting expectations, shuffling priorities while, meeting, AI is implying 10x, and feeling that you need to, you were talking about outputs, reaching those 10x, right, results. Yes.
Absolutely. One more. And so reaching those outputs, balancing, juggling all of that's happening in life, in work, right?
So leaders work with people, yeah. So it's possible to account like supporting profession, and we know that psychotherapists, they also work with people, need psychotherapists as well. So that's why it's very high burnout for leaders to supporting people. So they need support as well. But usually everybody, especially top, think that they are leaders, they will support by themselves. So that's why circle is cancelled, right?
Wonderful. That is the leadership paradox. It's that leaders' responsibility and expectations increase, yet who's there to help the leader? And oftentimes what's gotten them to that role has been this heavy lifting, and I like how you reframe leadership is a people job, right? But are leaders all day spending time caring for the people? But they're also doing strategy, they're also doing networking, they're also doing the work, they're not just focused on people, right? And so there's this expectation that leaders are leading people, yet at the same time, it's like they have their whole other job, which is just the work, right? And that's even more so for entrepreneurs and founders, right? Okay, so what we're seeing is that this decline in engagement is coming from leaders. So we're seeing more in the non-manager here versus the manager. And then when we go into stress levels, we're seeing that stress is the highest of all the negative emotions. Negative emotions, they're not bad. We just consider them as unpleasant, but an accumulation of negative emotions is really going to have an impact on our health and well-being, right? And so when we go to the detail of anger, sadness, and loneliness, which you mentioned over here, we see that the leader is outpacing by far the other parts of the organization. And that's wrapped into that increased responsibility, the increased expectations, and also that sense of identity. This comes from workplace well-being, so corporations. There's a lot to learn from it because basically everything we're seeing here is just heightened in terms of entrepreneurs and that sense of founders and that sense of responsibility and that sense of identity. So in your venture, are you considering human capacity as a driver or competitive advantage? So that I'm going to just throw out there, all right? Are we considering who we are as an individual and how we're fostering human capacity as a key driver of success? And that's what I want you to consider, all right? So leading to paradox number 3 is what we call the founder endurance trap. And this is building off of what we saw for just general leaders. We're seeing that failure is, the venture failure is sort of the risk, the fear, without recognizing what it might be driving that failure, right? So what we see is that there are increased demands, just like everyone. There's this heightened level of uncertainty, but it's when it's their own venture, it becomes more personal, right? But I don't think you could ask anyone in the world that's like, no, I don't see a lot of macro level uncertainty that we're living right now, right? But it's when we've put everything into it and our identity is part of it. And that comes to this pressure, because of that heightened uncertainty, creates even greater pressure within. And if we're not managing that and just continuing to sort of be on that treadmill, I like the treadmill example, right? As an entrepreneur, we're on that treadmill, and then it's like we're growing. We have to get there faster, right? We're having more people. How do I manage this all? And it's like we just keep lifting the grade, right? And going faster, right? Just the sense is I can do it. I can just make it because I'm tapping into that definition of what it is to be an entrepreneur. This purpose-driven, this belief in the impact. Yet at the same time, these behaviors are having an accumulative effect, and they're narrowing our capacity to think, to relate, and that's driving the loneliness that you shared, and it's very real. And that chronic exhaustion and accumulation actually diminishes our sense of purpose. We become detached from what it was the original drive of our business. And it also diminishes our joy. So you'd mentioned joy as a driver. It also diminishes our capacity to relate to other human beings Basically, it diminishes everything we need to build that resilience. So if we don't take a step back and gain perspective on these alternative metrics, we're basically setting ourselves up for failure. It's like the slow motion train crash, right? Because first, it's the diminished capacity as a leader, which then has a negative ripple effect. And ultimately, then, it can lead to the failure of the business. But what we want to do is not only risk that failure of the business, but really recognize the decline in decision-making, the decline in emotional capacity and relational capacity that comes, and that we can stop that. Yet it takes massive reframing, and as we said, practice. All right, so just to go a little bit back to the brain and brain health, our capacity to think comes from our executive function. Our brain is disproportionately large compared to our body in terms of the animal kingdom. It requires a massive amount of energy, and that energy is needed to be able to get to our prefrontal cortex. We haven't really evolved that much since a couple hundred years ago or thousands of years ago. And so we have this deeper sense of passion, which drives ideas, and usually those ideas come for entrepreneurs, and that ability to impact. At the same time, that allows us to create, to connect with other people, and to really feel a greater sense of fulfillment, and that fulfillment, it sustains that motivation. But what happens is when we start to get into that wheel of the treadmill, increasing in speed and becoming higher, we just think we can make it, but that becomes physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion, that sort of, the threat becomes bigger. And while all of that is happening, we don't realize the cumulative effect that is actually heightening our sense of threat and diminishing our perspective. We get lost. And actually, typically we have response mechanisms that go against what are supporting our health and well-being. It takes us to a place of dysregulation, a nervous system dysregulation, which drives then greater amounts of energy to create a sense of calm, and we're not getting, and it diminishes our capacity to get rest in our day-to-day, right? It diminishes our capacity to use our executive function. How does this happen? Well, one, we can talk about the cognitive load, right? The cognitive load in the digital era. So we have a cognitive load is limited. Our cognitive load is limited each and every day. That's part of why we sleep, right? We need to replenish, we need to make connections, we need to process everything that's happened in the day-to-day. We actually need different types of attention. We can't have sustained attention all the time. We need to take that big step back and look out sort of at the horizon and make those connections. What happens is in this era that we're living, it's completely fast-paced, right? So that leads to behaviors such as multitasking. How many of you are multitaskers? I'll put my hand up. I work on it, okay? A few years back, we used to highlight multitasking. I mean, how many people put in a job description? I see like the hands raising, the heads going down. We used to put in job descriptions being a good multitasker, right? What we didn't realize is how massively detrimental this is in terms of our energy, our cognitive function, and our emotional regulation. It's pretty much the speedway to burnout, right? It can connect, it takes us down this path, all right? The alerts, we had our phone going off earlier, right? The notifications, anybody done a notification audit on their phone? You have to work really hard and invest in getting those notifications down. Okay, I've done it, and I actually had the insurance company really upset with me the other day. Are you not getting our notifications? And I said, no, and I don't want to, thank you. Okay, but how do we recognize that those alerts are really hitting us? And it creates a sense of hyperactivity that's taking our energy and taking us away from our ability to think with clarity, all right? And then at the same time, we have this information abundance. AI is that output driven, so we can constantly, the prompting of AI is scary. Do you guys see that? It's like they pull you into the rabbit hole of curiosity, right? Curiosity is amazing, but you put something in there like, do you want me to do more? And I'm like, why not? That would be great. And wanting me to do more? I'm like, yeah, okay. And it just drives that sense of like, I need to find out more, right? But you actually get off track to what was I doing in the first place, right? Okay, so all of this is extremely expensive when we talk about energy because our brain requires so much, and what we don't realize is we're depleting our energy sources because of that cognitive use. What happens then? We're not taking the time for recovery, and we're not recognizing how energetically costly that is, all of that cognitive, at the same time that it's diminishing our capacity. And when we have that diminished capacity, what happens is we get into this cognitive overload, which starts as that mental fatigue, that fuzz, that confusion. You feel it. I get it literally every afternoon. I get this, right? And oftentimes, like, come on, you've just got to work through, right? How many of you say that? You've just got to push through. We're trained. It's almost like and pay attention to that inner voice. It's really important. We've seen that self-compassion is a key driver of life satisfaction, which is overall health and well-being, all right? You're kind of like tough on yourself, right? Come on, you can hack it. I'm seeing your faces, and I want to just give everyone like a big hug, okay? That's real. What are ways that we can approach that in a very different way? Because the mental fatigue is real, but what happens is it diminishes our capacity, and we still feel like I can just power through. There are days when you might need to power through, but even then, we can reframe and take a different approach, like a glass of cold water, a walk around the block, a few push-ups, something, right? So, yeah, let's diminish, okay, we're gonna diminish the Spanish bias of that long siesta, but a really great power nap could be great, okay? Anyway, but that cognitive overload is real. What happens to that cognitive overload? We see a greater sense of irritability. We become harsher on ourselves. All of that requires more energy. So that leads us actually to an emotional overload. And then that takes us to our role as founders, as leaders. What are we transmitting? How does it come across in our tone of our communication, in our writing? People feel what you're feeling, even through writing, right? It reduces our emotional regulation, so we have less capacity, right? And that happens as the day goes on because we have a limited amount of cognitive capacity and we have a limited amount of emotional capacity. Now, that accumulative effect happens if we're not taking those micro breaks during the day, but also then if we're not sleeping at night, right? And as we've gone through the day and feeling like we just haven't quite hacked it enough, oftentimes that's when we'll stay up late to say, all right, this is when I can concentrate. And our brain basically goes into an hyper alert mode that allows us to be more efficient. I hear it from the MBAs all the time. No, I'm really good at working under pressure, when the deadline is tight. We basically trained ourselves to get into a chemical cocktail to focus. But what happens? That's huge in terms of energy, in terms of emotional, mental, physical. And usually after that, then we crash and we need recovery. The question is, do we give ourselves that recovery? Typically not. It's like the next day, here we go, okay? So when the brain is overloaded in this sense, from the cognitive, from the emotional, we have increased irritability and then anxiety. We're thinking, what could go wrong? We're starting to see the world as even more threatening. We have less empathy, and then our whole nervous system transfers into what is a threat mode. And we become into that fight or flight response, which diminishes our cognitive capacity, which continues to claim more energy, and actually diminishes our ability to be aware of what we need. And so this is a real risk of entrepreneurs. So that's the end of our dark tunnel. Any questions of sort of how those mechanisms come together, right? Yeah. Do we have a...
I went through a burnout recently, so I know that physiologically I had to then retrain my body's responses when I know mentally and emotionally I'm like, I'm safe, or this isn't going to happen, or this is it's okay. So our physiological parts I didn't hear you speak to, and maybe you could a little bit.
Okay, great. So let me ask you, before you give up the mic, before you had to stop, were you aware of that?
Oh, I knew it was coming.
But you knew, but were you able to make small changes, or were you able, typically we're wired and tired?
Yeah. I was wired, I was tired, I was urgent, I was pressured, didn't see a way out of maintaining it all while doing all of the things I was doing. There was no I used to, so like I had actually stopped doing notifications. I'd meditated, I'd worked out, I had all of that in a regiment to be like, I'm not going to burn out, I'm taking care of myself. My well-being's part of this routine. But then when I didn't listen to myself, my well-being became wrapped up in the burnout.
It becomes part of the to-do list.
And then meditation became a problem. Exercising, and literally my body's attuned to like you can't go running because that's going to pop up your cortisol level, and now you're going to be returned to this physiological reminder or like re-embodiment of your burnout. And so now that used to be something I loved to do, guys, and now I can't go running. I mean, I play with it once in a while, but it's.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for sharing, because I think it's really important to hear these stories and to bring the reality out of what happens. So it's kind of like you have another chance to stop and breathe, and you have another chance to stop and breathe, and you have another chance to stop and breathe until you don't. And I'm glad you're here, because there are many people who aren't here because of that accumulative stress.
And I'm just going to add, like, if anyone's not had a burnout, which I hope you never do, but I've never had it. I had a friend of mine look at me and they said, "You have no light in your eye. You are dead. You look dead inside." And I was like, I feel it. So, like, I don't want to, like, if you guys can not do that and find a way to, like, maintain it, just, your happiness is so much more important than a sale. I just cannot, or than the business success. Like, without us, we've got nothing else, is what I'm just going to leave.
Thank you. Because this is the important message, and that's what this session is about, to say, how do we build in earlier on alternative metrics which are going to allow us to sustain over time? Because if we don't, we'll be forced to stop, and then it's a far longer path forward. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the reality of life, and we don't want to shame and you're here because a lot of people wouldn't be able to be here, and that's what we see. So I'm not going to go into the detail, okay? And I do encourage anyone to go deeper and to take those steps and to consider, but the first learning is to pay attention to ourselves. How do we not fully disconnect, right? So first of all, I want to share what is the integration of body, mind, and soul. Recognizing how interconnected we are is fundamental. That when we are on exhaustion mode, that's going to impact every single part of this, right? Yet at the same time, there's this paradox in that we lose sensitivity. We stop listening to ourselves. We lose the ability to rest, right? We lose the ability to find joy in the little day-to-day pleasures. We actually lose a sense of purpose in our business. Yet, at the same time, we're on this wired, I must carry on, this is my identity, this is what so how do we find that balance, right? And that's what this session is about, to say, before we get there, but thank you for sharing, all right? And then how do we connect from this individual and say, hey, actually, this model shapes what I'm doing from the beginning, because I want to impact others. I want to impact the communities I form a part of. I want to shape the systems in the world. And that all starts from where we come from, a place of capacity, of agency, of energy. Yet how do we maintain that over time? All right? So what I want to do is present a new, a massive reframing and saying, how do we build a well-being infrastructure? How do we start with building well-being infrastructure? And I believe entrepreneurs can do this. I believe companies, especially big companies, they might have more funds, but they're slower. And they're a really built-in bias and culture that has taken hold. And we have some redefining to do. I've had people come and say, yeah, I was told I just wasn't resilient enough. That measurement of resilient, of I have to hack it, is the endurance trap, right? We want to redefine what is resilience to one of capacity, to say that I am making the decisions and keeping the awareness so that I can decide on what is most appropriate in this moment, right? So what we want to do is take a foundational approach to human capacity. This is even more important in the age of AI, because we're going to have diminished human capacity. The more we sort of offload onto AI, it sounds great short term, longer term, it's impacting our brain structure, it's impacting our emotions, it's creating greater loneliness, it's disconnecting us from others, and it's disconnecting us from ourselves. So how do we take education and take this holistic human development of body, mind, and soul? So for entrepreneurs, founders, I think it's fundamental to recognize it for yourselves, but then to say, what am I creating in terms of my community and in terms of my company? How can I elevate the awareness and build that education? 2, we can see human capacity and leadership as a performance variable. How do we see that as the way we can drive? Not something to be a cost for the financial metrics, but that we can really elevate different metrics and leverage human capacity for growth. And then how do we redesign what we're doing, the work, the overall systems? And there, for me, this is like twofold for entrepreneurs, because the companies and the products and the services that you're building have the capacity to reimagine the world, right? And to reimagine how we work, how we communicate, how do we build those from a place of human centricity, right? And that is my hope and my belief for the future. So how do we regulate to think better? So this is going back to what are some of the steps that we can take in terms of body, mind, and soul, building in smaller changes that are going to help us to be able to think better, that's going to be able to protect our brain health. So if you want to go for one key driver, we've got all of the energy at the beginning, right? The passion, the purpose, the autonomy, the agency as entrepreneurs. Yet how do we make specific steps to protect our brain health of ourselves and our companies, the people, right? How do we reframe to gain this sense of perspective, to say what is success, right? And then how do we build cultures and communities? Because no matter what you do on an individual level, that buffer can only get you so far if we're not creating a culture that's prioritizing and that's really embracing. And this is the part that I see is really challenging. So from the corporate setting, it's shown that 58% is the responsibility of the corporation and 42% is in terms of the individual, right? It's showing that there's a shared responsibility. So as a leaders, founders, entrepreneur, you're creating the conditions. What conditions are you creating? How are you building well-being in as a key performance driver? And how are you creating that into the culture in the day-to-day? Because without that, everyone is sort of on their own to keep their buffer up as much as possible. And we know that that just doesn't work, right? It can only get you so far. Youth helps, but it's actually masks that decline. And we're seeing greater youth burnout, right? Because it's kind of, it comes up faster, right? Where we have a way to hide it a little bit more. And so if you have these young groups of people that are driving your business, but we're not caring for their well-being, it will have a quick impact. We're not seeing the signs to catch up with it, right? So how do we continue to build around this model of body, mind, and soul? Recognizing interconnection. So interconnection, we can take interconnection and sort of stretch it depending on your levels of comfort. We can talk on a universe level, right? But talking now on just an individual level in terms of body, mind, and soul. Recognizing how interconnected we are, how we move our bodies is going to have an implication on all of our systems. It's one of the key drivers of mental health, key drivers of our digestive system, of inflammation, how we use nutrition as a driver of greater brain performance and of better sleep, how we take breaks during the day that will allow us to then build to the end of the day and have greater capacity to sleep. Because if we're not taking those breaks during the day, it's really hard to shut off our brains at night, which then will diminish our deep sleep and the quantity of our sleep, which is fundamental to the emotional processing, all right? So recognizing this interconnection and making small changes will allow us to build that resilience, the positive resilience, right? The capacity to make the decisions that we need to build, to elongate our energy and our performance over time. That comes also then with healthy habits, right? So we're stringing those together because to decide to do something takes more energy. Yet if we can reframe and say, this is important, and then build it into a habit, we're helping ourselves in terms of that energy protection, that brain health, but also we're creating that culture around us. And that's where we come to the systems. And I really believe that entrepreneurs can create those systems. And it's fundamental to start building a world that's prioritizing what is human capacity. Because at the moment, our growth is coming at the cost of health, basically brain health, emotional health. And we're seeing that across the boards. Actually, the World Happiness Report, which I talked about at the very beginning, we're seeing that in the high GDP countries, the lowest levels of life satisfaction in youth. And a lot of it comes with what are the metrics of success that are the external in terms of finances, in terms of job titles, in terms of work, that can access a lot more, but youth are having more dependence on digital devices and less human connection, and we're seeing a direct relationship with high GDP countries and youth levels of happiness. And that happiness comes from what is the community and the human connection. So we have a lot to learn in terms of what metrics we're using. So I would like to say we can go to any parts of the wheel, but considering entrepreneurs have that purpose-driven, that impact, that ability to have flexibility and agency and creativity, what I would start with is how do we protect recovery? And recovery, not just in sleep, but recovery in terms of prioritizing what is our brain, emotional, physical, right? So how do we recognize recovery as critical? Let's use recovery as the key driver. How do we build recovery in as metrics? What might that look like, right? How do we incentivize recovery as part of our day-to-day? Not just sleep at night, but recovery within the day. I was teaching with a group of HR professionals who are responsible for the well-being strategy of the company, global multinational. And they themselves said, how am I supposed to go for a walk during the middle of the day to clear my head? What will people say? That was number one. What will they say? And I said, okay, but when you're home on home office and you don't have to say and they don't have to see you, do you go for a walk? What do you think they said? No. And why? Why? Guilt. They're busy, of course, we're all busy. We don't give ourselves the permission to take care of ourselves. And that is the massive reframing. How do we start educating holistically? So I would like to start with prioritizing recovery. What does that look like? We all have time for a walk, whether that be a 1 minute, 5 minute, 15 minute, or a great 1 hour walk, whatever you want to call it. Recognizing that prioritizing recovery will protect our brain, it will help us in that emotional regulation, it will help us in the relational capacity, because if we don't have the energy, one of the first things to go is the relational capacity, and that relational capacity is so foundational for leaders to be able to connect with other people, but it's also foundational just as human beings and our energy levels and our well-being. And then finally, our leadership influence. You said it really well about the loneliness. When we don't have that energy, we actually start to seclude ourselves. We pull ourselves out of the game under the excuse of, I'm just gonna work harder, right? I'm just gonna get it done. And we stop communicating, all right? So how do we focus on energy cycles? We can be really efficient. Think about your day. When is your most productive part of the day? What? Morning. Okay, I have a lot of entrepreneurs that say late at night. Usually that's the hyped up because that's the only time when it's quiet, when I can, and for a lot of moms, by the way, it's called the second shift. When the house is quiet, that's when I can start working. I fell into that trap for a time too, all right? So think about your energy cycles and how that we have a normal in a 24-hour, a normal up and down cycle, but then how do we leverage those to really create the time and space for us to work on what is most important that time. If the first thing you do is look at your email or look at your phone or look at social media, that's the biggest drain in terms of our energy. It's like basically using all of our dopamine hits in the morning, and everything else seems like an uphill battle, right? So how do we redesign our day thinking about energy cycles? How do we truly focus on what is recovery at night, and what are the points of recovery that we need during the day? And consider what is cognitive load and set up systems that are going to help us to protect that cognitive load and emotional energy. So I will leave you at that to say energy and human capacity are the new KPIs for success. How do we build them into our businesses? How do we create practices, reframe, and really integrate into ourselves, into our teams, and into our cultures, and into society so that we're prioritizing being human for greater impact. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lisa. You're well on time. Got 6 minutes left. Maybe there are any
I'm getting
questions.
nervous. Would you like to join me? I'm like, am I on time? That's all right. He's got full energy, ready to talk about entrepreneurs.
Are there questions?
Any questions? We'd love to hear questions. What resonated?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Hello. So thank you so much for this and for the framework. It really helps the structure where to go and where to focus. But bringing down, to the day-to-day, how we can implement this framework to ensure that we sleep more, that we have less cognitive load, that we take advantage of the energy cycles. What kind of systems we can put in place? Is there any practical advice or any reference where we can, use to build on top of that framework?
Great. Okay. So I'll give you 2 parts to that answer. Number 1, just the awareness that we have, then how do I take that back to my company? So I would believe no matter the size of your company, even if it's a 1-person company, I would put a well-being strategy. How many of you have a well-being strategy? Right? What is the well-being strategy of the company? Number 1. 2, what are we going to measure? I would start with recovery. And how do we build that into the day? So it's educating on a holistic approach to, we're here to make positive impact. In order for us to make positive impact, we need to have energy, we need to have capacity, right? So it's a stance, a strategy, a stance, and then how do we build in those metrics? There's a great playbook, so if you want to look at some areas and have a specific playbook, it's open, is through Oxford Wellbeing Research Center. It's actually the World Wellbeing Movement. There's a huge push from my space, the space that I work in, to say, how do we reframe? How do we use governance and metrics as ways to change the way we work? It doesn't mean that they're not mutually exclusive. It's reframing to say, how do we build this? So I encourage you to use that as a resource. Indeed has a great workplace well-being. The words you want to use and look for are workplace well-being. And there you will see data, metrics, factors, interventions that you can focus on. Number 1 intervention is awareness and education. Number 2 is measuring and transparency in terms of those results. Thank you. One more question and we'll finish.
Thank you so much. And I like your last message connected with KPI. Yeah, energy is new KPI, like new currency as well. Yeah. So, how do you prognose to measure it? And it could be some kind of discrimination, because if person come to a new job and we measure energy and say no, we don't need you. You have low level of energy. So, what is your prognosis? Because I think in 1-2 years it will be possible.
Okay, really good question. So the number 1 metric for well-being, workplace well-being, is something called life satisfaction or subjective well-being. And I get a lot of pushback. Who cares what you think about life? I want you here to work. But actually the studies and research show that your perception of how good your life is has a direct impact in your well-being. All right, so the question I will ask to all of you, it's a scale of 0 to 10. Take a big step back and say, how is life nowadays? On a scale of 0 to 10. If that were a ladder, which rung are you on? Now I'm going to ask you, no further response is needed. Anyone who's here, please respond. Scale of 1 to 10. Let me ask you, 9, 10. I'll go, but wait, hold on. 7 to 10. Raise your hands. 5, 6, and 4 and below. That is the number 1 driver metric for life satisfaction or subjective well-being. When we are 7 and above, we have greater capacity to meet change. We have greater productivity, greater efficiency, greater retention, less sick days. This translates into direct workplace outcomes, right? So that's number 1. Other things you can measure in terms of energy, which is a key driver, and you'll see that in the Indeed study. Other ways that you can measure that is to just put the word out there. Sleep is important. Disconnection is important. What are some of the guidelines you can have around work, technology, and connection? Just to give the message, disconnection is important and your sleep is important. Adults need 7 to 9 hours. Rarely are we getting 7. That's a minimum. We need it for emotional processing, for cognitive connection, for memory, for processing. So maybe start there. And then another key metric is exercise. So maybe a campaign to say, what are you doing to build? Then you can go into digital, how we work, deep work, and start measuring. How are we creating space for deep work? How are we creating meetings that allow time for recovery in between? I think we have to leave it at that. Thank you. I've really appreciated this time together and the engagement. I wish you well.
Thank you, Lisa.